Welcome to Graceful Healing, a podcast to get straight talk about healing and living again. My name is Maureen Lake. I'm a holistic health coach, speaker, author, and thyroid disease fighter. Each week, I'll be bringing you graceful conversations to inspire you to seek new ways to hit the reset button to catapult your health and vitality to new levels. Listen in and open your heart to all the new possibilities. Are you ready? Let's do this. Talking to Michele was like talking to a longtime friend. She's so personable and approachable. The interesting thing is, when Michele and her husband lost their business and home 5 years ago, it opened up an opportunity to reinvent herself. Michele felt a bigger calling to follow her passions into the world of health, wellness, and most importantly, mindset. Not only did she end up writing a book about that tumultuous time in her life, she also created her coaching business, MicheleLaine.com, where she now works with clients to transform them beyond their limiting beliefs, improve their health, and reduce stress to improve the quality of life, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Like I mentioned, Michelle's the best-selling author of her book, which is called Stronger Than the Storm: Proven Strategies to Conquer Fear, Discover Strength, and Overcome the Unexpected. Michele shares with us today some incredible ways to help women shed their sabotaging habits. So important. And to transform their inner world and create the life that they really, really want. Michele lives in beautiful Northern California, up by Chico, with her husband and two amazing daughters, Sammy and Jenna. I can't wait for you to dig into this interview with Michele. She has so many important and impactful things to share with us today. Hello, everybody. Today we have Michele Laine on the show. I can't wait for her to share her personal story with you. It's going to be impactful. I know that for sure. How are you today, Michele?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. So tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you ended up doing what you're doing today based on that.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on your podcast. Yeah. So my backstory, just as a quick history, I have been with my husband for 27 years now. And along that journey, we've built businesses together as well as started our family. And so my whole background is in entrepreneurship and accounting and finance. And so I would run the back office of our businesses as we grew them. And we actually ended up growing our main business into many branches as the years went on with us. So what caused this whole transition in my life was 2008, if you'll remember, there was a period of time between 2008 and 2013 where the economy kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
The housing crisis hit and banking industry was affected. So we had this whole big storm happening and brewing in that, right?
Right.
Well, we just happened to be, and I always like to say this, I don't know if it was the right place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time. So it's kind of interpretive, right? At that moment, it felt like we were in the place at the wrong time. But what happened was we had a line of credit with one of the top banks for over 15 years. And we have a seasonal construction, business, wholesale stone business in the construction and housing market trade.
Okay.
And so when all that kind of came collapsing down, we were affected by that. And what had happened was, we had quarries of our own. We produced fabrication of stone materials. We were kind of the one-stop wholesale shop for Northern California.
Oh, wow.
And we had customers all the way down the coast north. We had customers in Southern California, and then we expanded with different facets of our business through Idaho, New York, and a lot of the Oklahoma and Midwestern states. So we were pretty much nationwide. And so when this hit, obviously being in the housing and the building trade, like when seasonal weather hits, everything slows down. And we'd had line of credits to get us through our businesses, which we always paid back annually. In the midst of this economic downturn and everything that happened, it was just in winter. And so overnight during the banking crisis, two banks were involved, and I don't want to mention I don't know, but I still have this fear of mentioning the names, but
sure.
Bank One was bought out overnight by Bank Two. And it was a surprise to everybody in two ways. The first bank had no idea it was in danger of being bankrupt. And then the second bank that came in and took it over, another big name, swooped it up. And so we all woke up the next morning going, wow, there's some big news. And within that, to make a long story short, they decided to not honor line of credits that for any businesses that were with that bank. And so we just kind of went into a 5-year fight with trying to keep hold of what we could with our business, and the new bank trying to dismantle all of it and get paid back as fast as possible, because they just decided they weren't going to honor line of credits anymore. That wasn't their business structure.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Jeez.
So it created its own storm. So here we have a really good, viable business. We were sound in our business strategy, and all of a sudden we're getting torn apart in pieces to pay back loan covenants that they were ever changing, right? Mm-hmm. So it was dramatic in its own right, but we were successful in doing that for 5 years. And at that moment, the stress became greater and greater and greater. And along that journey, we had built our forever home, and we had just moved into that. And our kids at the time were 3 and 9. So they were still quite little. Mm-hmm. And both of our incomes were tied into it at the time that we had decided to relinquish it. So the fight, went on through courts and different things. And so what had happened was, they just had more power than we did and more time. And so we had also experienced health changes with my parents. I had a mom who had multiple sclerosis my whole pretty much life growing up. And her health was being impacted. Like the last 2 years of that 5-year fight, we lost her. We lost my dad shortly after, my aunt, my cousin, and then Scott's dad right towards the end of 2012. Oh my gosh. So much going on in one time. So talking about like a storm brewing, right? Mm-hmm. Like we were in the middle of the eye of it during all this business change. And then we were just getting hit left after right with family losses. And so we kind of became numb to all the news, and having to still pick up and tie our shoelaces in the morning and get to work because the fight didn't end. And then it just came to a point around March of 2013 where I looked at my husband looked at me, and we're like, this isn't worth it. Like we could feel the impact of stress on our bodies. We could feel our health deteriorating just from absorbing all this and trying to fight the fight. And we decided to give it back to the bank and let it all go at that moment.
Wow.
So, yeah. An effort to preserve, an semblance of life. Like it feels like in that moment, like you're never going to get through it. Like, what am I going to do? Our incomes are going to be gone. We've lost our home, but we found a rental, and there's so many beautiful things that came from all this. Right. Mm-hmm. And we had built a really strong family unit with those young kids of ours. So 5 years down the road, they're 8 and 14. And it'd been a journey, but they were not impacted by the stress. Well, in a sense, they weren't impacted by the stress that we were living, which we felt really good about. And I'm sure that none of that goes unscathed, right? Mm-hmm. So when the time came and we had let that go, interestingly enough, our fight with that bank was like, oh, we can dismantle you, we can sell you off piece by piece, but we were a pretty specialized business. And we were kind of saying, look, let's just reorganize this. And they just didn't want to listen. So I think in essence, it was just our time to move on to do other things. But when push came to shove and we decided everything was done, they came back to my husband and said, hey, we're having trouble. We can't auction this like we thought. We need you to sell this for us and we'll pay you a commission. So we're sitting here going, what the heck?
Really?
And we told you that. And now is when you decide. But we also didn't have a lot of options as we're trying to finalize all these pieces to being embedded with these businesses and then moving on to find new jobs and still be able to get the kids to and fro like we had. We didn't have family to help us, So Scott took that option as I began to build other businesses on the side so we can hopefully create a semblance of a new income a couple years down the road, because it became very apparent that we were embedded in time with this, and also that I was not as free to come and go with just getting a job for 8 or 10 hours a day, like being someone else's controller. There was a lot of little facets along with that. So he took that and ended up dismantling the company that we built together for 30 years, piece by piece by piece by piece. So in my book, I write about the story of that whole journey, and what that was like, and the relationship, and how for us, we were so fortunate because it grew instead of came apart. Because a lot of times with financial loss like that, or just huge loss, some relationships don't always make it through.
Absolutely.
There was so much to be grateful for. And knowing that no matter what we went through, like we had each other, that got us through it. And people would say later, like, we had no idea you guys were going through this. Like, you were just always jovial. Or my neighbor would be like, you would sit on the front driveway and the kids would play and you guys would sit on your bench and have a glass of wine. Like, if from the outside looking in, you'd never know. Right. And so I had never thought about that before. But the story, when we tell it to people over time, as we started to heal, they were like, you need to write a book about this. And I'm like, okay, I heard it enough where I'm like, I'm going to do it. Because one of my passions I had found out, I'd missed all of this, was what have I not been doing? Like, what is it that I like to do? Right. And so the big question came up, even though we went through all this loss, I had a chance to reinvent myself. And I thought, well, do I want to rebuild and start over doing this accounting? Do we want to rebuild a business just like we had it? And part of something had died in my husband and I where we really didn't want to.
I bet.
And it was affected for sure. And so the question came, like, what would you do if you could become anything or do anything in your life? Like, you're actually free to do that right now. What would you do? And I didn't know how to answer the question. And that concerned me because I had been on autopilot for so long. And so I started to explore that, and some of the interests that I had loved dearly, I wasn't doing anymore. And I started to put those back in my life. So a friend had a blog that she allowed me to guest post blog on, and that led me to starting my own blog. And then that led me to writing this book. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I really have a passion for health and wellness, and I want to become a strength and conditioning coach. And so I really started taking action on some of those things, even while we were kind of rebuilding our life. And got to the point where I launched my book, and all this new opportunity came about with speaking at health and wellness conferences for women, and really beginning to implement and share what I learned on how to take care of myself through all that stress, and what worked for us, and then what really I needed to up my game in afterwards from things I learned to do better, and how we can always be learning to take care of ourselves better. But without some of those practices, like, I don't think we would have made it through the stress that we did.
So I'm just curious, like, when you were going through your hardship, were you still taking time to work out and doing your strength and conditioning, or is it something that came about afterwards?
No, actually, so that has always been a part of our lives. Scott and I have always enjoyed working out and eating right. And in fact, the short time I had after we built our beautiful home, I was able to stay home with the kids. So I was a home mom. It was like my little dream come true, right? For about 3 years. So I learned to cook. I taught myself how to cook, and then learned how to make healthy meals. So it became kind of a fun game, and got the kids involved. And so even at young ages, they were in the kitchen helping. So that just became a component, especially as we lost everything, of something simple that we can continue to do together.
Oh, how nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we learned that those were some of the things that kept it all together for us. And so even in my book, the first half is the memoir piece, and the second half is like a toolkit on how to get through storms in your life, for at least the perspective of what worked for me, for us at the time. So it was, making those good nutrition choices, and continuing the workout, and knowing that life is perspective and choice, and that we always have a choice, and what got us through was knowing it could have always been worse, and not wishing that upon anybody for whatever storm they're going through. But really, when we can take that perspective shift, like, there's always a place to be grateful for where you are, what you learned from it. And we were just able to hold on to that quite a bit and build from it. So it became really important to us.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we had done it before, we did it during, and then I found places like sleep that I would give up, and stress that I wasn't managing in as much as I thought I was, because it felt better, endorphin-like, and all the adrenaline would get going when you work out, and that felt better for an hour than the stress that we lived for the next 23, the day. But I learned the impact of stress, and it became really important to me to slow down a little bit more. And the biggest gift I think we got from all of it was being present in the moment, because it was so easy to live in the past and in the fear of the future of, oh gosh, we're not going to have money and we could end up on the street, or what's going to happen to us. But we knew a couple things. We knew we were still young enough to start over. We are capable of making money. And those little kids of ours right there, those moments where we could be present with them and take a walk and play outside and sit with them and let the cares of the world escape for an hour or so, became such a building block for our future. Mm-hmm. Even as a family unit. And it's really difficult when our lives are so busy. It's so hard to pull back because we're so good at being busy, right?
Right.
But we can pull back those moments and just try to really not worry about the past and not look to the future, but stay in the now, in that present moment that you hear all the time, right? There really is a blessing in it because you're more present. You're able to enjoy those moments and give yourself a little break by slowing down. And then that is how you begin to manage the stress and take another look at other areas of life where you can make changes. Mm-hmm. It's not a perfect process, but it definitely has been something. Here we are going into our 6th year now since all this ended in 2013, and something I demand for myself and my body. My body demands it. Like I became cohesive with what my needs of my body are because they were screaming so loudly when it was all going wrong.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's been a journey.
Oh, I bet. I'm just sitting here trying to process the fact that, you lost your lifelong business, but then you've lost so many important people in your life too, in such a short amount of time. Most people would just crumble and crawl into a hole and have a really hard time digging themselves out. And somehow you've had this positive mindset and have been able to shift everything. It's just incredible. Really. Yeah,
it still blows my mind a little bit in this journey of the book release and speaking and all these new areas to face your fear. The actual subtitle of my book is Proven Strategies to Conquer Fear, Discover Strength, and Overcome the Unexpected. And when I wrote that to the title Stronger Than the Storm, I was talking specifically about this situation. And it's been such a parallel for the next couple years' journey of myself and finding myself more and facing all those comfort zones that I had been forced to step out of to grow. Mm-hmm. It's been so beautiful and amazing to look back and connect the dots and go, okay, I'm on the path I've been meaning to be on, right? And perhaps none of this was an accident. Mm-hmm. And it was just time. So that's how I look at it. And I have been diving deep within myself this last year and a half, I guess now, because I was faced with things like you have to reach out to podcasts and talk about yourself and talk about your book, or people want to hear like that fact of like, I'm going to tell this out loud. The story is easy for me when I write it because I can put pen to paper, thoughts to paper, but speaking it out loud, so much came up to the surface. Mm-hmm. Like I got emotional and I judged getting emotional and I thought I was weak for being emotional and like all these things that are pretty normal human reactions, right? But I'm like, why can I build businesses on one hand and I cannot get through these steps to be visible, I guess is what it came down to, right? Mm-hmm. That was where the growth happened for me. And that's where I'm like, I need to fix this or at least figure out what it's called or what's happening. And as luck would have it, just being involved with some of these speaking opportunities, I was exposed to women who looked at life a little differently, who were doing self-improvement. And I've always been drawn to self-improvement, but I never knew it was like a career path.
Sure. Yeah. Or even allowed yourself the time to even pursue it when you were so busy in your other field.
Oh yeah. So like, well, we only know what we know at the time until we know better. Right. Exactly. So how could you not move forward in that? In my perspective, how could I not move forward in that, knowing that that exists and being able to maybe take a look deeper within? That sounds really scary sometimes, right? Because we shove stuff down. We don't want to deal with it, or we've thought we dealt with it enough because then we're busy and got to get back to work. But as you uncover those layers, like the beautiful lessons that are there to learn. And so the reason I couldn't launch my book properly, the reason when the marketing part came of my book, it became daunting and overwhelming is because I wasn't ready. to be visible was so scary. And I had to go figure out where that fear was coming from.
Yeah, I can totally relate. When I wrote my first book, it really was a love story originally to other parents that were raising a spirited child. But in reality, it was more of a love story to myself. But I didn't realize that till like a year later. And I had a hard time talking about it too, because it's the vulnerability piece in exposing pieces and parts of your life and the lives of others, like within your family. That's not easy to do.
It's not. And you know what's interesting, and I don't want to discount it or sound disrespectful, so hopefully it doesn't come across that way, but now that my parents are gone, it's almost easier because I think often how I've been able to kind of break through and start to share some of those pieces, and yet that's still my growth and sharing more. There's a lot of shame and guilt embedded with that. Yeah. And I think it's the era of which my parents grew up or how they were brought up. Like this goes deeper than just, hey, I launched a book last year and this all showed up. No, it's like, what was my model of the world growing up? Like, what was my environment? And I remember specifically, even with my mom being sick, I was 12 when she was wheelchair bound. My dad was too prideful to ask for help. And so help in terms of any kind of mental health that we might have needed to cope with this changing illness of her multiple sclerosis and how it was affecting all of us.
Yeah, we just suck it up.
Her misery, all of it. We just suck it up and take it because we're not the ones in the wheelchair. So we don't ask, we don't tell, and we don't talk about our dirty laundry. That message was very well embedded in all of us kids growing up. And I thought that was normal. You just don't share. Right. So even writing it wasn't like, I felt like it needed to be said and would help others. So knowing that it wasn't as hard when I launched it, people were like, oh my gosh, your story is so vulnerable. Thank you for sharing that. I'm like, it is? Yeah. Is it? Because I was in a different headspace with it. I thought it was helpful to share it. But, talking about it and now figuring out where some of that comes from, that's vulnerable. And then what's even more beautiful is like, the things that uncover when you do. So there's that piece, and there's no shame in that. It's just, again, my parents only knew what they knew and what might their lives have been like growing up and what were their parents' influences and the environmental influences. And so I fell upon life coaching in a way where you explore these kind of patterns, where some of our pains and our emotions are stored and how we can shift them and bring them to light and allow that emotion to flow a little bit and clear it, so to speak, from our bodies, because it stays in our bodies. If we're talking about how stress impacts our bodies, some of that emotional stress stays in there too. Absolutely. And it changes us in health and energies and all kinds of things. And so like finding that existed, and that would have only been found out by meeting the people I did at one of the conferences I spoke at for Spark. Like the right people came in line, and I was like, you can get certified and teach people better, more tools. It like blew up the back end of my toolkit in my book and put it on steroids. And I was like, I'm all in. Tell me about the brain. Let me know. How does it work? What's the brain body connection? And now it's been like, how do I blend it with the health and wellness piece that I know on how to better care for ourselves with nutrition and the type of exercise and how that's still a stressor, but how we can move through more stressful times and making smarter choices and, all those things too. But oh my gosh. And then like taking apart those stories of our past, like I was talking about, and where other stories start to reveal themselves. For me, in short, like because of all that stress at such a young age, my world felt out of control. And even though we had a loving family, it was very chaotic growing up with that illness, and then having to find our own ways to maneuver through the emotions of dealing with the backlash, basically. Right. And so I felt that I could keep control of my body by doing something that would upset my mom or, whatever that dynamic was. And I would not eat, or I would try to get thinner because it seemed like everybody was happier if I was thinner. And so all those messages I started to reinterpret or make it mean something in my life, and led me to, anorexia and bulimia in my young teenagehood years. And then I was able to kind of recover from that, but the body dysmorphia followed. And it's just no accident now, as I've healed myself and gotten through some of this and still struggled through my adult life with chasing 5 more pounds and the image in the mirror, and how that became so important when it didn't really need to be. It just needed to be healed you know?
Yep.
But it is the whole precedence behind the rest of the story. Like, that is why I have a passion in health and wellness. That is why I've watched my parents when they didn't take care of their health and how stress took their health down. And when my mom had a choice to really care for herself the way the doctor suggested and then chose not to, what impact that had in our lives. And so the bigger picture, as I connect the dots looking back from this scenario of the storm in our life and the symbolic nature of my book that I wrote, is like there was more to be revealed and uncovered and to share, and how it does all tie together.
Exactly.
It's phenomenal, and it still blows me away in such an amazing way. I love it. And just helping others get through that too is a serving nature that just heals my heart. If that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I even see with people in my life today that they don't take their health seriously, or, you know, why is it that out of every 2 people in our country, one of them, 50% of this population is type 2 diabetic? And what is it? What messages are they getting, or what are the wrong messages that we're sending? Yeah. And it's just, for me as a health person too, I get really frustrated. I get frustrated with so many aspects of it, and want to dig deeper into why is it that you won't heal or won't allow yourself to take the steps that are necessary? Or is it just the fact that you don't know what those steps are? Or like when I work with people, I love going back into their history, like we were discussing, to really figure out what are those root causes that are blocking you, because oftentimes it's emotional or spiritual.
Yeah.
And it's important to get there so that you can continue your journey forward.
Yeah. It's a lot of the, our top emotions are pain and our anger and our fears, and we shove them down. And we think that we got through them because we're resilient creatures as humans. We can get through so much. But just because we got through it, so to speak, doesn't mean we addressed it.
Exactly.
And so over time, yes, those pile up. Like we said, the energy store, and they show up as, dysfunction somewhere, disease, dis-ease, and we discount it. I'm playing the words off dis right now. How many dis words can we come up with? But I think because we move so fast in our lives now compared to 50 years ago, or even, further back, that it's so easy to distract or numb. Or, we've got phones in our hands constantly, and something to take our attention away, and television and media, and just like everybody's opinion in your face every 2 minutes. Like we sometimes don't even stop it to know what we're feeling or how something feels. And what I've discovered working with women is, that connection between what our bodies are telling us and then how we're paying attention are on 2 different spectrums.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I noticed too is a lot of people will just have a habit that needs to be retrained, basically.
Yeah. And that's why I call myself a habits transformation coach, because when it comes down to it, it's what we're willing to work on, what we're willing to do and be consistent with, and what habits that are working for us and what habits aren't, that we need to identify, that we can make those changes on. And then working with clients that are ready to make those choices, because if you're not ready, nothing's going to change. You're just going to default back to that comfort zone we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And absolutely. So your answer to why, I think a lot of us either don't know the information's out there, like me, before all this hit, like there's a different way. Sometimes think this is normal for our lives. It's just what we do. So I think it's important for all of us to get out and kind of help spread that word, right? And then for the people who are ready, to have that support and know that the decisions, the answers that they need are within themselves. They just need a little bit of insight on how to help them discover that they're there. It's not like life coaches or coaches are telling you what to do or give you advice. They're just asking the questions to help you process through what's already within you.
Right. And that's the best way to grow, for sure. So Michele, I always end each podcast with this one question, because the answers are always so interesting and intriguing. So I'm going to ask you my final question. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would you do? What would you say?
I'm going to say what comes to mind. So we'll see how this answer flies out. If I'm thinking of my younger self and I'm looking at her, I would say, those areas of life that you're afraid of, where you feel the most fear, don't be afraid to step through them. If you have a dream, go follow it. If you have a passion, go live it. You can make your life however you want it to be. You don't have to settle, and you don't have to go with the flow. You can be unique and be yourself and embrace all of it and lean into it. And don't spend a lifetime looking back, regretting or wishing you would have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Michele. And for the listeners, if they wanted to real quickly find you online, what's your website?
Yeah. My website is www.micheleLaine.com. So it's MICHELELAINE.com.
Oh, perfect. And I'll have a direct link in the show notes along with all your other social media links so people can find you and follow you and reach out to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been so much fun.
Oh, thanks so much, Michele. Have a wonderful day. Oh, thank you so much for joining me today. This episode is brought to you by my book, The Graceful Advocate, Taking Control of Your Life After a Diagnosis of Thyroid Disease. You can find it currently on Amazon. I love it because my friends call it a purse book. They keep it with them when they go to the pharmacy, grocery store, or even to the doctor's office. It's a great little guide to keep you on track and informed. I can't wait for next week when I get to see you back on the pod. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate you so much. If you ever need someone to chat with about your healing journey, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me through my website at maureenlake.com.